This is Hannibal here from thehannibaltv.com. And today is my special guest. This is the first live interview he's ever done with me. There's about two or three, I think three actually, other interviews on here with none other than former WCW superstar, former WCW head booker back when they were kicking WWE's butt in the Monday Night Wars. He was the booker of Florida Championship Wrestling, many other territories all over the world. The Taskmaster himself, Kevin Sullivan. How are you doing today, sir?
Great, Hannibal. How are you doing, my friend?
Oh, I'm doing very well. And before we get into the actual interview, which, by the way, fans that are watching this live, we will get into a bunch of your questions. You are going to be back in California on October the 22nd, managing the Blood Hunter against Too Cold Scorpio, and that's for PCW Ultra. Front row tickets are already sold out. Second row tickets, I hear there's only about 10 left.
Right.
So people can go to pcwultra.com for that. But maybe to start this, you could talk a bit about PCW because you've been there since the beginning.
The show they put together is fabulous. I know that you went there to do interviews, and when you walked in, you were blown away like I was. They get the cream of the crop. They had Rob Van Dam. They had Johnny Mundo. They had Fatu, who they had Sabu. They had Terry Funk, Sandman. The Great Muta came and made an appearance at the United and wrestled. I mean, they've had everybody, the who's who. Now I want to tell the people there in California that I've been there many times. But if you haven't seen the Blood Hunter in action, Scorpio is a very good friend of mine. He's one of the top wrestlers of all times, I believe. Innovative guy, tough as nails. Scorpio, I'm just telling you this, brother. Lace them up tight because this Blood Hunter, I've never seen anybody like him. He hasn't had national TV exposure. But when I go to conventions, I'm not going to say 50 people say it, but there's at least 10 to 12 people say to me, either Blood Hunter is my favorite wrestler, or when am I going to see the Blood Hunter in this area? So he's taken it back to where it should be. His work is his wrestling is how I think wrestling should have evolved into. He's more MMA, judo, pro wrestling, and martial arts combined than just sports entertainment. There's no sports entertainment with him. And I was at a match in the South in Texas, and I saw him just destroy people. And one of them was Gangrel, and I mean, they had a fight that was unbelievable. The guy that went as Montoya in the WWF.
Oh, just incredible.
Yeah.
Who actually ran away from the match
like
a coward.
Ran away from the match. I couldn't believe it. And he had blood all over him. And the funny thing was, he was in the room next to me, and I saw him walking in front of me, going up the stairs, and had blood all over him. He opened his door and just kind of collapsed into the room. I said, "Is there anything I can do to help you?" He said, "No, I think I'll be all right." And then He really took a beating. It's something to see. And Scorpio, uh, again, you're one of the best of all times. You better be on your A game because this guy's coming for you. And I know back in my day, in my prime, which is a long time ago, I would not like to have faced him. And during that time, I was facing Blackjack Mulligan, Andre the Giant, Dusty Rhodes, Superstar Billy Graham. This guy is so well rounded and all kinds of martial arts expert. And the other thing is, he's in such great shape. You're not going to blow him up like you can do most of the guys because Scorpio keeps a very, very fast pace. And he does moves that are really innovative. He'll throw a drop kick, standing there or on the top rope. Well, I hope you don't get hurt as bad as he's hurt these other guys. So I'm just warning you, brother. You're a tough man. It's going to be an exciting match. The people in California and LA are going to go crazy. They like violent wrestlers like the Sheik and uh, Jacob Fatu. Well, when they see this guy, he's going to fit right into their modus operandi, that's for sure.
And the Sheik and Fatu are going to be there as well. Ron Simmons is going to be there. Victoria Vaughn, JTG, Alex Hammerstone, the champion. It's going to be a packed card. And then the next night, I understand, Ashley, you're going to be not only managing the Blood Hunter, but this new Purple Haze on the other end of the country in Florida for CWF Reloaded. I think it's in Wamora Convention Center. You probably know how to pronounce it better than me with your history.
You're pretty close, Lamore. And it's a brand new building. It's a brand new little civic center. And it's the first time, and people from Championship Wrestling from Florida Reloaded. They got some great talent coming in there, and they've done a remarkable job trying to get this thing up and running, and they have. And the people in Florida are used to violent matches, but again, you're going to see some real crazy stuff there in Florida with the Blood Hunter and the new Purple Haze.
Now, you were talking to me about this before we went on the air here, but Spade, a fan watching, would like to know what it was like to work with superstar Billy Graham. You said you had some new information to share about him.
Well, it's not new information. It's just my thought process. I was there when Billy and Ivan told Vince Sr. that they were going to run opposition. And Vince Sr. and Mike LaBelle were very close. And he told them, that's one thing about Sr., he was a man of his word. He said, well, guys, you know what I got to do? I got to call him. And he told them, don't run Memorial Day. It will kill you. Well, he called the LaBelles, and the LaBelles, the mother was Eileen Eaton, the famous boxing and wrestling promoter. Mike LaBelle is Gene LaBelle's brother, and they blocked them from ever starting. But I think that if Billy hadn't left after he dropped the belt, I think he would have been the first guy. Like you hear now, I hear that they're chanting for Wyatt, even though he isn't there. I think they would do the same thing for Billy, like you've said before. He has the most sellouts at Madison Square, 19 out of 20, and the other one was pretty close.
Yeah, most consecutive sellouts. Bruno,
Yeah.
I think, has the most, but he had the most in the row as a main eventer.
Yeah, and he was, and when he came, when he wrestled Dusty, the crazy thing was that was at the height of when Dusty became the American Dream, and still 50% of the building was cheering for Billy Graham, which shocked me. I think that if Billy had stayed and the office, meaning Vince Sr., was a man of his word, and that's why he gave the belt to Backlund. He told him he was going to get it. I think he would have seen that he could have got another run out of Billy, and he could have had a series of matches with him and Backlund that would have sold out all over. And then when it was time, he could have had Ivan interfere in the championship match and have Billy drop the belt that way. And he could have helped support Backlund in all the big buildings up there from Portland, Maine, Boston, Providence, Philly, Pittsburgh, you name them. And they could have been a tag team occasionally. And I think Bob would have learned a lot working with Billy, and that charisma that Billy has, just the rub for Backlund to be around Billy. They wouldn't have had to bring in so many guys to prop Bob up, because Bob had probably the hottest act in the wrestling business ever to follow. And I think it was one of those things where a guy gave his word. And I think that if Billy had stayed, he would have found out that I made a huge mistake, and I'm going to pay Bob what he would have got with the belt, and Billy would have got it back. Because you can't imagine. Here's these people indoctrinated for the heel to get beat by the champion, and they turned him babyface. The people, he didn't change his rap or anything. I think it would have helped their business for sure, and I think it would have helped Billy that he wouldn't have fallen on some dark times.
Now, we've seen that this upcoming SmackDown in Madison Square Garden in September, the first taping at Madison Square Garden since the lockdown, only has about 9,000 tickets out, including comps. This will probably never happen, but do you ever think they would bring Billy back for a tribute night with WWE there? Because I do think he has one more legitimate Madison Square Garden sellout left in him.
I do too, and you can't say never in the wrestling business, but everybody that saw Billy when he was the WWF champion would come out that night, because Billy owned New York. They would come out and they would sell out. And I think it would be good also for their business, just for the guys to see when a guy is as over as Billy, what it takes to draw money. And Billy, he's had a tough time in his life, and he'll tell you in his book that he made mistakes, and he did. But the main thing, I think you're absolutely right. Billy Graham has at least one more run in Madison Square Garden, and I know they turn people away.
Yeah, I agree.
It'd be like in baseball if they brought back uh, Pete Rose after suspending him for these length of years and have a Pete Rose night in Cincinnati. It would be, you couldn't get a ticket and you could charge anything you want. Billy was that over.
Matt R has an interesting question. Who would be on your Mount Rushmore of wrestling bookers?
Uh, the first one would be Eddie Graham, because I've told you stories. I used to work in Kansas City, and I'd go over and work in St. Louis. I was lucky Pat O'Connor liked me, and I was his tag team partner on a few occasions. And then I actually was Sailor Art Thomas's. That's a name from the past. That he was a phenomenal looking athlete. And Eddie has to be first. And then number two, this is going to be strange, is Jim Barnett. He had 5 national television programs, 4 in the United States and 1 in Australia, and drew nothing but money. He brokered the deal for Turner to buy Crockett out, and then he brokered the deal for Vince to buy Crockett, or Crockett to buy Vince out. He was very influential, so it would be, I have 2, and then Dusty's 3, and I think Mark Lewin would have to be 4, because Mark drew money everywhere in the world, and that's my 4.
Michael Collins has a good question here. I watched this episode recently of Baywatch that you were on with Ric Flair and Hulk Hogan. How did that come about that you all appeared on there? And do you have any memories of that? I'm sure it was a pretty fun job being on that set.
Yeah, it was really a fun job. Hogan owned a percentage of that production company. So he got us on, but we stayed at the Marina del Rey. We were there for 5 days. They gave us $5,000, and we ate and I think they gave us $300 a day to eat on. And then my first residual was $2,500, and each time it was cut, in half. So at the end, I got like 17 cents, but it was a great time. And it was great for WCW because it put them in the mainstream. Probably at the time, the hottest TV program in the world.
Yeah, it definitely was at that time. David would like to know if you have any stories or memories about Shane Douglas.
Oh yeah, Shane. When I worked in Japan, and I actually broke Paul E into the business. He came down and wanted to be a manager, and he came down with this big bodybuilder called Tombstone, who had a feud with Scott Hall, and I sold Scott every night. It's a different. This is probably bullying. I said to Scott, "Pop him off the." There was a spot where Paul would jump up on the apron. I said, "Pop him off the apron every night." So he did it for about a week, and I said, "The kid can take it." And Paul had good ideas even then. Paul, all those people that I've talked to you about on the Mount Rushmore, Paul didn't know Eddie, but he got some of Eddie's knowledge through Dusty. He was very close to Barnett. So Paul, and I went into ECW, and then I see all this violence, but the last match is Shane Douglas as their world champion wrestling. And Shane kept that company afloat because he looked the part. His interviews were innovative, way ahead of his time. And he did a hell of a job with that belt.
Yeah, he definitely did, and he's still wrestling
Yeah.
to this day, actually. So he's got some matches coming up in November that I've noticed. I don't know if you were booking at this time, but when I interviewed Tank Abbott recently, he told me to go watch a match he had in WCW with La Parca, which was very stiff, but it seemed to still be a work. But do you have any recollection of the Tank Abbott versus La Parca match and what exactly happened behind the scenes? Because Tank was still trying to play it off as a shoot when he was talking to me.
I wasn't there at the time, but I know what happened. All right. I know second hand. He tried to get bully La Parca, and La Parca is no one to bully. He was a very, very accomplished wrestler, amateur, and he was a tough guy. And he held his own against Tank. And I don't know what the root of the problem was, but Tank sort of thought that he took wrestling as a joke, and some of the guys didn't appreciate that, especially Steiner when they got in that fight altercation. So
Yeah, Tank actually said it was Rick Steiner that told him to rough up La Parca because Steiner didn't like La Parca, apparently. But I know, would you say that thing with Steiner was legitimate? Because they both told me it was legitimate.
yeah, I was legitimate because he was making he had paid to get in. I'm pretty sure, unless they worked me, and he was shooting his mouth off. And Stein and I was at the gorilla position. I said to Rick, Rick, go down there and shut that guy up. And Rick just took off and went down there. I mean, Rick was a beast during that period. And I'm
Yeah,
not
it's
sure about that La Parca thing. I'll tell you why. I don't think the Steiners wrestled La Parca at all. I think it was maybe Tank's way of trying to get out of it and blaming
it,
Steiner.
it seems like Tank could have actually been a good heel if he had kept at it, but I guess his heart was in MMA, and WWE never offered him as much as WCW offered him.
Yeah, and that was funny because then later on, Brock comes along and they give him the keys to the kingdom, and rightfully so because you're an amateur wrestler and MMA. You know how hard it is to be accomplished in more than one aspect of shoot fighting. So I think Brock was very good for the WWE. I think in WWF, what it was, I think it was F when he first came, but he became a crossover star. And I think people tuned in to watch Brock that were MMA fans.
Are you surprised that WWE didn't end up picking up Tito Ortiz, who I guess it was last year he put out a video that he had been down at the Performance Center doing a week-long tryout, and he seemed to really like wrestling, but for whatever reason they didn't pick him up.
I was very shocked. I was very shocked because they had great success with Brock. They had great success with Ronda Rousey, even though, she got hammered in the last two fights. But Tito isn't he in their Hall of Fame? I
The
mean,
UFC
to
Hall of
have
Fame,
Tito,
yeah.
yeah, I mean, I don't understand why they would pass on Tito unless he was asking for a lot, maybe not money, but a lot of time off. That would probably be the only reason I think they wouldn't try to get him, because he probably knew how many days Brock was working a year. He probably wanted the same.
Tito, I guess, has a boxing exhibition. I think it's actually going to be a pro fight against Anderson Silva. Not sure if you heard about this, but I know you're a big boxing fan. Silva's the favorite in that fight. Who would you pick, and what do you think about the new trend of having these past MMA fighters box and celebrity
Well,
YouTubers box?
okay, I'll give you I bought uh, the Conor uh, Mayweather fight, right? And in the first round, Mayweather, what did he throw? 3 punches? He didn't turn it on until he figured the people got their money's worth. I'm not going to say it's a work, but to me, it looks like more of an exhibition than. And, you know, they're trying to give, I think when you're boxing, you can get away with a lot more stuff. You've boxed. My family's been in the boxing business forever. Uh, you know, you can work a boxing match where you throw a punch and it's catching off gloves, you know what I mean? And make it look really good. And hey, if these guys want to do it, go ahead. But this, what's his name, John Paul?
Logan
This,
Paul and Jake Paul,
yeah,
they're killing it in pay-per-view buy rates.
I know. I just would wonder if he runs up with somebody like the Blood Hunter or some Charlie Haas, what would happen in that?
Yeah, I guess it would depend if it would be boxing or MMA, particularly with Charlie, who I actually had the opportunity to amateur wrestle Charlie a couple months ago, and I like it. He knows how to like inflict pain in amateur wrestling, which I thought was pretty cool. And he showed me some techniques that I wasn't aware of that you can get away with legally in amateur wrestling, but they're almost more submission style.
Yeah, and I think those two guys that I mentioned could beat most of these guys that have been retired in, whether it be boxing or MMA or wrestling. That's why I kind of think that a lot of the boxing, I go back to uh, Connor's fight. Floyd wasn't throwing any punches until, like, where did it go? 10 rounds? 9
Yeah,
rounds? Whatever it was, he didn't start throwing punches until the round before they stopped the fight. So I think, and people were saying, oh, Connor's going to win. Connor was facing a guy that was undefeated. At the time he's, I believe, 49-0, right? And you think a guy, his first time into the boxing, even though Connor's got a hell of a punch, I didn't think he could beat Floyd, and I think Floyd carried him.
yeah, but it made a lot of money, and that's what the fight business is all about. I think Ben Askren got his biggest payday ever losing to that Jake Paul guy, more so than any of his MMA fights.
Yeah, you saw it afterwards. His wife came up, or girlfriend came up and kissed him, and he had a big smile on his face. It wasn't like someone that just got his ass handed to him. So that was very interesting.
There's a fan on here, Sunset Moth, wants to know your thoughts on teaming with the Honky Tonk Man and Austin Idol early in your career.
Well, uh, I teamed with the Honky Tonk Man when we were in the first family, when he was Wayne Ferris with Jimmy Hart. I had a wonderful time with him. And then with Idol, it was a very strange angle we shot. He was a heel that turned babyface, and I wouldn't accept him as a babyface until finally I was forced. Was Abdullah and Mark jumped me, and he came out and made the save, and I was forced to be his partner. And our interviews were pretty novel at the time. I'd be saying, you know, Idol, one of the things I understand why I team with you, I get up every morning and look in the mirror and I say, I guess I'll do anything for money. And he'd go on, Jackson, I'm the star of the show. And we'd be arguing, almost come to blow every interview. So it was a pretty cool thing. And I enjoyed both of them, and both of them drew a lot of money.
And you were mentioning to me on the phone the other day that you had a story about Jake the Snake, who always claims that the guitar shot from the Honky Tonk Man ultimately led to his drug use. In reality, whether that guitar was gimmicked or not, it's the WWE's fault for providing him that guitar. But what was the story that you want to share about that?
Well, I'm just saying that, he claimed that, and I know that shattered his neck. I mean, I just can't believe, like you just said, that they didn't have someone go out to pick up the right kind of guitar on an angle like this. But, I'm not pointing my finger at anybody, but Jake was in Florida with me in the 80s when that cocaine was rampant. I mean, I remember Time magazine saying that cocaine was actually good for you. It was crazy, absolute crazy down there. And I'm not. I knew some of the people he hung with because I hung with the same people, but it might have accelerated his drug use. But we were all taking something back then because you couldn't wrestle 7 days a week and travel without taking something. But when he got hit with that guitar, there's no doubt that shattered his neck and probably escalated any kind of going from recreational to try to numb the pain. The pain, you've been in pain. There's nothing worse than being in serious pain, especially in your neck area where you can't sleep, and then you have to take something to sleep, and then you have to take something to get up. And those guys, Jake and those guys, were flying around the country every day. They go from San Francisco to LA to Portland to Seattle to Vegas, and they're up on the first plane out. And, they get back to the hotel room. It's 2 or 3 in the morning, and they gotta get up at 4. I'm surprised more guys didn't pass away because when you were on that cycle, you don't even know what the average life is because all you're doing is seeing. I'd wake up sometimes. I have a lot of guys have told me this, and we would at WCW. We stayed at Marriott's, and I'd say what Marriott I am because it looks the same. So yeah, I mean, and if someone gave me that guitar, I would question using it. But when you're involved in that kind of heavy duty angle and making that kind of money, I don't blame it on Honky. I don't blame it on Jake. I blame it on the company for giving them that guitar. Certainly, they knew that wasn't going to break easily.
Someone says on here, you look great for 71.
Thanks.
You mentioned the younger people passing away last week, I believe. Bobby Eaton passed away, who you probably knew pretty well from Smoky Mountain and WCW. Do you have any memories of him to share?
Yeah, Bobby was the nicest human being that was ever in the wrestling business. But Bobby had some really funny quirks. He would drive, they'd fly us everywhere, but Bobby would, rather than fly from Charlotte to Atlanta, because he could get home that night, he would come to do TV at Center Stage. He'd bring 3 bags, 3 different outfits, and he had shirts, he had anything. If you wanted gum, Bobby had it. If you wanted dental floss, Bobby had it. He'd pull out a hubcap if you needed it. I mean, but Bobby, you looked at Bobby, he didn't look like he was strong. He was one of the strongest human beings I ever saw with tendon strength. I mean, Bobby was very ticklish, and the guys in the dressing room started to tickle him. He would push them away like he was Godzilla pushing a child over. He was, but he was such a wonderful, wonderful human being. He was a great wrestler, but he was a better human being, and he was a fabulous wrestler.
This is a great question from Dan. He wants to know your favorite member of the Dungeon of Doom. A lot of people will say it was cheesy, but I loved the Dungeon of Doom when I was a kid watching WCW.
Well, the Dungeon of Doom, and I've explained it, was I don't want them all in the single matches, meaning Brutus, the Shark, Bull Payne, and the group of guys I had. Now, Conan should have been off by himself because he was such a big star in Mexico. They didn't use him right in WCW. My favorite was Hugh Morris because he just was happy all the time, happy to be there. And, later on, I heard about, him being the trainer and getting into a little trouble, but I sure would like to hear his side of the story before he gets crucified.
There's a female fan on here. The German lady would like to know what it was like working with Jacqueline in WCW, and she went on to be put in the WWE Hall of Fame.
Oh, I wanted, at the end, I wanted to put her over because I did my interviews. She's tougher than any man in this company except me. And I kept on saying that. And I was going to eventually put her over. She was great, a great athlete. I don't know if you'd know the difference. I don't know if she was in judo or jiu-jitsu, but she was professionally trained and she could wrestle amateur. Because I saw her, some of the guys would get in the ring and wrestle amateur early, not many of them. And she knew amateur wrestling. She was so nice. She was a nice person.
This lady has a follow-up question, which I'm sure the fans would like to know. Why was the Yeti gimmick scrapped? That's kind of gone down in history as a weird gimmick.
Oh, that never should have been. That was not mine. And what happened was that guy was a very nice guy, but he owned the rights to Big Sexy. Kevin Nash bought that from him, and I think Kevin paid like $5,000 or $10,000. And because of that, I think he went to Hogan and said, "This kid. The kid was going to go as Big Sexy, but we got to come up with something." So Hulk came up with the Yeti.
Interesting. Well, people remember it.
Yeah, they sure do. Especially when he came out and was hugging him, when he made his entrance.
I think the issue that people had was he was dressed like a mummy, but a Yeti is actually like an abominable snowman.
Exactly. I mean, he was, like you said, he was dressed like a mummy, and they should have got a monkey suit on him or something, because it made
Yeah.
no sense at all, and it killed the guy's gimmick.
Well, you probably scared them off of monkeys. We won't get into
Yeah,
that story. People can watch the first interview.
yeah, yeah. Uh,
There's a fan on here that wants to know about a guy you brought up earlier, Rick Steiner. Any memories of working with him?
oh yeah, I thought I was so smart ass. Uh, this is when Dusty was the booker. I went to Dusty and said, well, we're in the varsity club. I said, Dusty, we can't keep Rick Hill anymore. The people were chanting for him. So that's when we all turned on him. And then Dusty booked the match of me and Steiner in the Boston Gardens. The first time we were in the old gardens. So I said, I'm going to pull a rib on Rick. This is when the Detroit Pistons had won the NBA championship. Well, in Boston Gardens, all the championship flags are flying from the Celtics, and all the retired numbers are flying. So I send Rick out first, and the people start going, whoo, 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 right behind him, screaming for him. And the announcer says, as he's coming down the aisle, and coming down the aisle from the home of the new world NBA champions, the Detroit Pistons, Rick Steiner. The whole building starts booing. I sat down the aisle, and the announcer says, and coming home to his hometown from the greatest franchise in the history of basketball, the Boston Celtics, Kevin Sullivan. I look at Steiner, and I can see smoke coming out of his ears. First thing he does, he attacks me, shoots me in, gives me a clothesline, and I do a Linda Blair in The Exorcist. My head turns around, and I take a bump to the floor. As I'm pulling myself up on the chair, the guy sitting there is Marvin Hagler. I said, hey, brother, I need a hand. He said, you're on your own, my man. So my rib turned out that I ribbed myself. Boy, Rick was so strong. I mean, he had vice grips for hands. He was so strong. I actually think he was stronger than his brother.
Yeah, I've been in the ring with Rick maybe 6 or 7 years ago, and he's still pretty strong.
Yeah, yeah.
Alan Kesselman wants to know if you stay in touch with Mark Lewin. How's he doing these days? And do you have any stories of him to share?
Yeah, Mark lives in Singapore. His wife is a Singaporean, I guess, princess. She's in the royal family. And Mark was a great all-around athlete, and he was a tremendous swimmer. He's unbelievably strong. And one time in Hawaii, when I was booking Hawaii, we were on the outer island of Kauai, and we parked the car, and it says, there's a big sign, and there's a slot where they put the numbers in, and it says, do not swim here. There's 6 people have died since January, and it's like April. I said, Mark, what are we doing? He said, we're going to swim. I said, Mark, man. He said, oh, don't worry about it. It's for people that don't know how to swim. Well, when we get out there, not only are we in the ocean, there's this river running into the ocean, causing these whirlpools. So I swim as far as we're going to swim, I guess, and I turn around. I can't see the beach until the wave crests, and then I see how big these waves are. And I said to Mark, what are we supposed to do? He said, when you hit the wave, ride it in, and when you hit the sand, run like hell. And I did that. Mark had no fear of the water anywhere. And then this is when Rikishi came over. We're in this little lagoon, and Mark says, you got to time it because of the waves. I'm got to dive over the lava that's in the water. that when the water comes in, it's covered. When it goes out, it's uncovered. So I said to Kishi, hey, brother, what do I do? He said, just dive in. You're half native. You can do it. I dove in, and when I did, my thighs hit that lava, and it just ripped me open. I gritted my teeth and turned around. He says, how is it? I said, great, come on in. He did the same thing, but he hit his chest. So Mark every day was another trip with Mark. He had great stories. He'd been around the world numerous times. He lived in Samoa for a while. He lived in Japan. He lived in Singapore. Yeah, he was one of the first big names back when Chicago wrestling came about with him and not King Curtis, but Don Curtis, and then his legendary feuds with King Curtis. They was great.
Cam would like to know if you know Mike Jackson from Georgia and if you're aware that he's still wrestling in his mid-70s.
Yes, I do. And I saw Mike at a convention. Mike was a great wrestler. He would have made it big in this era. He came along when they weren't using the cruiserweights much, but Mike was a great performer. But I didn't know he's still wrestling in the mid-70s. Good luck to him.
Now, we've had 2 losses in the past month or so, both power plant guys from the WCW power plant. Jody Hamilton, who ran the power plant, the assassin, and of course, Mr. Wonderful, Paul Orndorff, who actually was the trainer, one of the trainers at the power plant. Could you share any memories of both of them? And did you visit the power plant often as well for scouting yourself?
Yeah, I'd go down there because Mike Graham was also down there, and Mike and I were friends. I was friends with Jody. Jody was very kind to me when I first broke in the business. Jody Hamilton, I listened to some of these podcasts, and some of the Morocco had talked about what a great worker Jody Hamilton was. People don't understand what a great performer Jody Hamilton was. There doesn't seem to be a lot on tape early on Jody, but do you know the name Dick Steinborn?
Yeah, he was involved in Stampede Wrestling for a while.
Okay, his father Milo was the first man to squat 400 pounds unassisted. He would turn the bar on the end. This is before squat racks and put it. He was the strongest man in the world one time. And he was the promoter at the end in Orlando. And he was a great guy. But Dickie was a great worker. I saw him and Jody have a match on Columbus, Georgia TV. And they had this, it had everything. It had high spots, it had chain wrestling, it had big pumps, it had everything. But Jody's getting heat. This is just little things that you never see today. Jody's getting heat on Dickie, and Dickie slumps back in the ropes, and he fires a left, but his right hand's underneath the ropes, and he goes to throw the right, and it gets caught in the top rope, and then the assassin took over on him, and he, just took over and won the match. But Jody was a great person. He was great at the gorilla position. Paul Orndorff, I mean, they called him the Brandon Bull. He was tough as nails. I mean, and he was a great guy. I'm sorry to see them both leave.
Well, John Paz, your podcast co-host, apparently interviewed the psychic a few weeks ago, and Paul said hi to you from the grave.
Yeah, I know. I hope you didn't say there's a room ready for you soon. I'm trying to
Oh
keep that.
God.
Yeah, I'm trying to keep that up off. So
MH says 23 years later, Goldberg is still in the title picture. He's probably your most famous creation. What are your thoughts on his longevity and the fact that WWE is still having to rely on these older stars because they haven't created anyone to match Goldberg's level in the past 20 years?
well, I don't like to knock anybody, but we are a copycat business, right, Hannibal? If some guy comes out in a gorilla suit, 3 weeks later, a guy's going to copy it and have a gorilla suit. I don't know. The closest thing they came was Brock, you know. But if they were going to copy something, what got Goldberg over was all I made him was Mike Tyson. That it wasn't going to last long and it was going to be him dominating. And I don't know if they've lost the, or if these, like, I saw where one girl that was a writer got fired because she didn't know any of the names of the people she was writing for. Did you see that?
Well, she was bragging about it on the internet. I think that was the issue. And they didn't like that she was publicizing that she was hired with no wrestling knowledge.
Yeah, I mean, so I
And
mean,
I said that. Why haven't they hired you? Wouldn't it
well,
make sense to use someone like you that's a known genius in wrestling, but they'd rather hire these people with no knowledge?
well, uh, for it doesn't surprise me about Goldberg because he was so over, and I don't want Bill to take this disparagingly, but I think what he has going for him now is people think that he doesn't have that many more matches left and they want to be there and see the last one. Now, it's time, and I think Bill knows this. Everybody in the world put him over, including Hulk Hogan. It's time for him to put Bobby over, but I think it should be a very good match, the best they can put together, and it should be a 12 to 15-minute match and pass the torch to the younger guys. Because there won't be too many years from now where Bobby's going to have to do the same thing Bill's doing. I mean, they haven't, you know, I may be wrong, and Roman Reigns is getting over, but the last time they had a guy really over besides Roman and Brock doesn't work that much, was John Cena. And John was the face of the company. He did a magnificent job. And it turned, he knows what he wants out of life. And I've never met him, but he did something very nice for my family. They lived in New Hampshire, and Teddy Long had John meet my nephews and gave them some memorabilia. And I thought that was nice. He didn't have to do that. But they haven't made anybody that's must see TV. And it was like all of a sudden everybody quit at the same time. Brett got hurt. Goldberg retired. National Hall retired. Six retired. Ric Flair was working sometime and then got sick. I mean, Hogan couldn't work because of his back. They lost everybody that should have given those guys rubs. And I think we're seeing this, like you said, the attendance. at Madison Square Garden. You said they got rid of 9,000 seats, and some of them are comps.
According to
Wow, that should
Meltzer,
have
there's like
sold out.
3,000 comps.
Wow, so that should have sold out quickly, but they got to go back to the drawing board, and I think they're getting rid of a lot of guys, and I don't want anybody to lose a job because it's hard on everybody. But I think rather than having a performance center, they should open up little areas where not everybody was learning to take a bump from the same guy. Not everybody was learning to take an arm drag from the same guy. Not everybody is learning to chain wrestle by the same guy, because all you're doing is mass producing the same match. So I think with all these cuts, I think there'll be a lot more cuts to this NXT coming up.
And this is just a quick mention. WCW was not allowed in Madison Square Garden, right?
Right.
WWE had the monopoly on it.
Right. Nobody in 100 years, except the McMahon and the Johnson brothers and Toots Mondt and Vince Sr.'s entourage, had control of the Madison Square Garden for almost 100 years, until Ring of Honor in New Japan had that show there.
Yeah, and the only reason they did good at that time was because they had all those guys that started AEW.
Right.
That was like their peak, and sadly they've gone down since. I got to ask you about this whole thing with Ric Flair on the weekend where Charlotte supposedly no-showed a WWE event in Charlotte where she was supposed to be the main event.
Right.
To appear. She didn't actually appear on camera, but I guess she was there to support Andrade, and Ric Flair was also there in Mexico.
Right.
What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I heard this from Conan on his podcast, that Rick rented a plane, flew them down there, and from what I could gather, Conan had him chop a couple of guys, meaning Rick chop a couple of guys, and Rick and his new son-in-law put the figure four on the two guys, and the place went crazy.
Yeah, they definitely did.
What?
I saw it. That did happen. Yeah,
it did happen.
Yeah,
and I would be willing to bet that was Rick's first time in Mexico.
I believe it was, because there were some fans that were speculating on if he'd ever wrestled in Mexico before, and it didn't seem like he had.
Yeah. After the time where he was in Trinidad, him and Piper had that big riot with Jack Valente. I don't think he wanted to go out of the country and defend the belt.
Do you think that Charlotte probably asked for the night off and WWE knew and just false advertised her anyways for the house show in Charlotte she was supposed to appear at? Or do you think she skipped? Because it seems like that would be an awful big risk for your career if you were to just no-show an event in the town that your dad kind of made famous for wrestling.
Right. And I'm with you. Hopefully that they false advertised, because if they didn't, now they got to make a move somewhat, suspend her, fine her, or something. I don't think they can let that one go. But I have a feeling, don't you have the feeling that they false advertised her.
You never know with WWE, but I can't see her doing something that's that risky because there's got to be a punishment for something like that.
Yeah, that's what I think too. I think is I think she told them she was going. It was booked so far ahead, and I think they said, "Well, go ahead and we'll say your transportation or something." Who knows? It's kind of like a tempest in a teacup up there. Everything's kind of in a whirlwind.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate you coming on with us. The fans, we only asked a small percentage of the fan questions, so we'll have to have you back on again sometime. I'll remind the fans now, he will be appearing for PCW Ultra on October 22nd, managing the Blood Hunter against Scorpio. And that's going to be a huge card in the LA area. Then again for CWF Reloaded, the new promotion in Florida on October the 23rd. So is there anything you'd like to say to close us off today, Mr. Sullivan?
Yes, it's always great to see you again, and I appreciate all the fans' questions. And when you see Billy, ask him if he thinks that would have worked for him.
I will for sure. I'll actually show him that clip. So
Okay,
thanks
great.
again. And fans, we'll have Kevin back on again sometime.
Thank you.
Thank you for watching the Hannibal TV.